G'day guys, welcome to Pumped On Properties November Australian Property Market Update, where we bring you some of the most important KPIs plus some of the most interesting information that we've been finding or following from Australia's leading banks, analysts and the likes of the Reserve Bank over the last month. Now, this month has been a biggie, man. Half the market's gone up, half the market's come down.
It's interesting, the story of two markets in Australia at the moment. You've got some of these smaller markets at the moment still crushing it. Brisbane, Adelaide, Perth all doing really well, but yeah, seeing Sydney, Melbourne, Canberra, Hobart, Darwin all really not performing too well compared to last month.
Which is what I suppose was the exact intention of the RBA, to slow the Australian economy down to a grinding halt, to get rid of that nasty inflation post-COVID, and to get us to stop spending money for things to stop inflating in price. But obviously, one of those things that we like to spend money on in Australia is property, which has resulted in the monthly numbers in a couple of these cities, as we can see, coming down. But when we go to the annuals, which is the big picture and has less to do with how people are feeling right now and more to do with what's gone on in the last 12 months, where are we sitting at the moment?
Over the last 12 months, there's three markets that are absolutely smashing their historic annual averages, with Brisbane, Perth and Adelaide absolutely booming at the moment, whilst every other capital city in Australia isn't doing too well over the last 12 months.
You know, as always, I've been doing some reading this week, and according to KPMG, if we look into 2025, they're forecasting the average house price in Australia to go up by about 5.3%. where CoreLogic's sort of suggesting it's going to be more likely somewhere between 6 to 8%, with Brisbane, Perth and Adelaide looking to be the front runners again next year, with Melbourne now starting to sneak up as well. I think it's been obviously down for a long time since the start of COVID, and to me personally is starting to look more and more interesting. So you'll definitely be hearing us talk about that market a lot more in the coming years.
It was super fun the other day diving into all the data for hundreds of suburbs throughout the Melbourne market to get a bit of an understanding as to what's going on down there. And it does get me pretty excited, and I can't wait to go down there and check out some of those areas.
Now, when we look at vacancy rates, they have slightly increased in every market outside of Perth and Adelaide in the last month, but everywhere but Canberra, from our perspective, is still sitting at a phenomenal position right now, with vacancy rates well below that 2% mark, which is still considered massively undersupplied. Now, generally at this time of the year, we'd start to see vacancy rates in spring and summer lifting a little bit as more stock comes onto the market. But I think the effect of these interest rates is also being felt, and there's not quite as many people moving around at the moment, or as many investors buying when compared to recent years, which is sort of resulting in a little bit more stock coming onto the market, which is a great thing, especially in those hotter markets like your Perths, your Adelaides and your Brisbanes at the moment.
Now, for the week ending October 20th, the auction clearance rates in Sydney, in Melbourne and Adelaide were all above the 60% range. So real estate agents doing a good job and getting the properties off the market down there. Whereas in Brisbane, Perth, Canberra, we saw the auction clearance rates below 60%. So a little bit more tricky in those markets to sell at auction. We do know in Brisbane in particular, not too many properties do get sold via auction. It is definitely more private treaty. That's what we experience as buyers agents. So when I see that number for Brisbane, it doesn't really cause any distress at all. It just sort of is pretty normal and consistent based on what we've seen in previous months.
Now, over the last few months, Simon and I have been talking in our market update emails as well as this market update video about the next thing coming, which, because interest rates have been stable for a while and the Reserve Bank is now clearly stating that the rates could come down to as low as 3.25% by 2026. I think the market is responding in a positive way. And now, for the first time in a while, we've seen those consumer confidence scores jump from the level of the last GFC and COVID, which is absolutely horrible, to around about that 89% mark, which does sound impressive because honestly, since we've been recording these new market updates, this is the first time we've really seen it jump. But the long-term average over the last 50 years has been more like 1.7%. So people are still feeling pretty shitty out there. We know times are really tough for a lot of households in Australia, but as interest rates start to come down and as people start to feel a little bit more confident, they can save a bit more money, they can pay off a little bit more of their debts, and they can sort of live a little bit more now that inflation isn't rampant and out of control. I think we should start to see that confidence level in the next year and a half go back into the hundreds, which based on history has a really positive correlation to prices going up, which is what this is all about.
Now, to add on to that, I think why so many people are feeling so good is because that unemployment rate is super low at the moment. It remained the same at 4.1% over the month, so plenty of jobs out there at the moment in Australia. Obviously, with the higher inflation and higher interest rates, the cost of living has hurt people a fair bit, but at least there's the jobs out there to make sure we can keep paying the bills. Now, to shift gears and look at the lending rates in Australia, there was a huge change over the last month with investor lending increasing to 39% of property purchases. Now, this is well above the longer term average, and we can definitely feel it as buyers agents at the moment. There is so many people reaching out, wanting to get into the investment market at the moment.
Now, one of the things that I like to follow every month, like all Australians at the moment, is where interest rates are going. And for the first time in a while, we saw that fixed longer term interest rate actually start to decline. I think it went down to an average of about 3.29% at the moment. So I know many investors and homeowners out there are sitting on sort of 6.5 to 7.5% interest rates. The last time I saw this happen personally as an investor was in about 2015, where the longer term variable rates were sitting higher than the longer term fixed rates, which was a really positive sign at that time of where rates ended up going to. You know, the good old 2 to 3% interest days. If only we knew what we know now, I would have been fixing those bad boys in for a long time. But this is a really positive sign, guys, and it's super clear now. Like we said last month, you jump on the media releases of the Reserve Bank and it's very clear where they're taking things. I think Australia is basically the last man standing at the moment. Canada, New Zealand, England, and America have all begun their rate cutting cycle. And as we've talked about in previous monthly updates, Australia normally follows 3 to sort of 9 months later. So I'm personally excited. They've done a very good job at draining almost all the money out of my personal bank account, as of many Australians like they wanted to. And hopefully we can just get back to some normality moving forward.
Now, contrary to what Ben was saying before, we have actually seen the total number of listings decrease over the last month, which is actually insane because, you know, from doing this for over 9 years now, generally during spring, we see a massive increase in listings and, you know, that is what's called spring selling season. But this year, obviously, it's looking a little bit different. So that's the difference between September and October. So next month, we'll have a look at the difference between October and November and, you know, maybe we'll see a little bit of a pickup there. The cool thing was though, when we look at the distressed listings, which have been super low, like below pre-pandemic levels, they actually only increased by 1.1%. So whilst people are absolutely feeling the pinch and Aussie bank accounts have been absolutely decimated, we aren't seeing dramatic numbers of those distressed listings picking up, which is a good sign that people are being able to afford to hold their properties.
You know, as we've talked about in previous updates and on previous poddies and videos, this mortgage cliff that they were talking about and scaring us all with for so long was never ever going to eventuate. And the reason for that is almost a third of Australians own their own home outright. A third of Australians rent their properties. And the other 40% like me that own debt on their properties have generally seen like a pretty significant lift in their rents, a pretty significant lift in their values, and their debts have either come down or stayed relative the same. So Australia isn't sitting on average with all of these people with 95% loan to value ratios or LVRs. Most Australians, in fact, when you look at the CVA data or the ABS data, have paid off more than 50% of their properties and are sitting in a very safe, very stable position. And that would be many of you watching this. It's just really the people that have bought in the last 12 to 18 months that have sort of put down smaller deposits that are the ones that have been banged up a bit through this recent rate increasing cycle. But it's interesting to sort of separate the media as always from the actual data, and we hope that these market updates sort of bring you a little bit more of what's really going on versus the speculation and the noise in the media.
Now, this month's gold nugget feels a little bit weird to say because I definitely am not in this category, but
You're not a trillionaire?
I'm not a trillionaire, definitely not. But it's crazy to think that the household savings in Australia has just reached $1.5 trillion. Like, that is so much cash sitting on the sidelines at the moment. I know I've invested all of my cash into the property market, so I'm not feeling the same way. But damn, like that's a big number for Australia.
That's a big number, man. And it's like, I'd like to see like where that's sitting. I
like just a little percentage of it personally.
It's exciting because that's a record level of savings for Australian households in Australia's history, which is kind of cool and kind of aligns with Phil Anderson and Akil's work. They're the guys that wrote those incredible books, The Secret Life of Real Estate and Banking, and The Secret Wealth Advantage, where they go on and look at hundreds of years worth of history and then give us a bit of a breakdown of how money moves around a cycle. And what they say generally towards the end of the cycle, because we've gone through a GFC, which is in living memory, we've gone through the mid-cycle slowdown, which was COVID, and people have got banged up, people just start getting a bit more conservative and stacking cash. And then at some point, all of this cash ends up coming back into stock markets and property markets around the world and around Australia. And that's when we sort of normally throw ourselves over the top and end up getting in a bit of a pickle down the line. But it's just crazy to see the setup at the moment and how on cycle it's looking at the moment.
And it was beautiful to see some positive news coming out that KPMG believe that property markets across the nation are going to go up next year as well. Good to see the resurgence in Melbourne as well, looking like that's going to see some positive growth for the first time in a while. So I'm sure a lot of homeowners down there will be very grateful to hear that KPMG expect the market to go up. So we'll have to wait and see. You know, KPMG, when we do our annual property market wrap, and we look at the predictions from some of these analysts, KPMG can be on the conservative side of things. So we'll have to see what pans out in 2025. But if we do move into this rate declining cycle, which we expect and the RBA has announced publicly, then generally off the back of that, we do see property prices rise. So I can see where they're getting it from.
The last little segment that we wanted to sort of start adding into our monthly market updates is just, you know, what this actually means for me and Simon and for you guys out there as investors. So as we've talked about previously, we've just gone OCD on data. We've looked at the 19 largest capital city and regional markets in Australia, every suburb within those markets within 60 k's of their centre point in their city, and then across every single suburb about 30 key performance indicators. So my brain was spazzing out a few days ago when I sort of looked through about 60,000 pieces of data. My eyes literally turned into a screen. But for me personally, in terms of the markets that I like from our sort of crunching of the data, I'm really liking Brisbane on the lead up to the Olympic Games. I think there's some suburbs in Brisbane that are completely priced in. And then there's suburbs just next to those that have massively underperformed this cycle to date, which is super exciting. We're really also starting to like the look of Melbourne. As one of our clients who's bought roughly about 18 or 20 properties down there over his lifetime said to me, he doesn't think it's at the bottom yet and that prices could fall away for a while before it hits sort of rock bottom. But Melbourne's looking cool to me and should look better and better over the next few years. In terms of the regional markets, Townsville looks phenomenal still. So many suburbs there that have underperformed in the last 12 years. And then Darwin, even though we're not going to actively go chase that market because it sort of just doesn't make sense at the moment, Darwin at some point is going to turn around in a pretty big way. That is by far, statistically speaking, the most undervalued market in Australia right now. So we're excited. I'm not a betting man personally, but I'm a data man, and for me, I'm going to be focusing on both Brisbane and Melbourne in the coming years leading up to the Olympic Games. I think they're going to be two really, really cool markets to keep an eye on. If you're thinking about buying an investment property in the next 3 to 6 months, then the team and I at Pumped on Property would love to offer you a one-on-one strategy session. To book the session, all you have to do is go to www.pumpedonproperty.com and click that free strategy session button. Now, in the session, we'll talk about exactly where you are right now, where you'd like to be longer term, and educate you deeply on the Australian property market. You can then take that information and go and absolutely smash it on your own, or potentially become one of the small number of clients that we work with each month. Either way, we look forward to continuing to help you build your property portfolio with confidence on your journey to financial freedom.